Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 17th of February, comes to you from London. And of course, the interesting thing is the dollar just continuing to rise here, now starting to test those 2019 highs, and that could be very significant for a breakout here. We're seeing 14% as potential upside. For the dollar index, so that's really quite strong. And we're seeing here the dollar is actually just nudging new highs all the time. It's had a very strong start to the year, going from 96.30 on the index to 99, so a good few percent rise there. And of course, in currency terms, that's a very significant move. Looking at the euro, we see here the euro, of course, is therefore weak against that stronger dollar, making new multi-year lows. So really significant there. Made 22-month lows last week, and we're seeing here downside potential some 12% lower, shorter term targets 4 and 6% lower. So that coming under pressure and moves towards parity, still hanging over us. 104 seems to be the likely downside target around the dollar at the moment, so keep an eye out for that. Taking a look at the Japanese yen, we're seeing here the dollar is actually looking strong here as well, just crossing into long-term bullish territory. Not quite convincingly through yet, but the trend is up, and the short-term trend, we're just starting to see that move back as well. So the dollar strength still becoming key. Looking at sterling, we see the sterling chart is actually also looking quite bullish against the dollar. Long term, we haven't managed to break through, of course, so that's also quite significant there. And if we look at the Swiss franc, we see here against sterling, sterling is actually looking pretty strong against the Swissy as well. Taking a look at Bitcoin, we see Bitcoin sitting here back below the $10,000 level. So short-term bearish, medium-term bullish, long-term bullish. That's starting to look more and more bullish all the time on that long-term chart. The big one, of course, is US stock markets taking the coronavirus scare in their stride, recovering from that fall away in January, making new highs. So markets are still in bullish mode. And we look at the Dow, we see we're higher there as well. And the NASDAQ as well, the NASDAQ 100 powering ahead. Barely fell back in January, in fact, and we see here, interestingly, just a shortage of upside targets. We have got one at 6% on the short-term 60-minute chart, but it's interesting that because we haven't had a pullback, we don't quite have the targets that the other markets do. The Russell 2000 index, the smaller caps in the US, not making new highs yet, and still not quite through the levels that we saw at the high of January. So smaller cap US stocks, we've not managed to break that level, so that's also quite significant. Taking a look at the futures this morning, we've got the S&P future up 0.25%, the NASDAQ E-mini is up 0.4%, but many of the US markets will be closed today for President's Day, so it will be a quiet day on the market. Taking a look at the FTSE, we are up 0.25% this morning. Not enough really to take us out of the doldrums. We're still well below that January high that we saw on the FTSE, so not performing anywhere near as well as the US markets. And the 250 mid caps in the UK also just struggling to make new highs, so that's quite significant too. Taking a look at the DAX in Germany, up 0.2%. Slightly disappointing news out from Germany on Friday, but that hasn't really affected the chart. We're seeing move there as well, and the CAC 40 also looking strong there as well. So we are just seeing some improvements there. Tokyo was down 0.8% there. Really have struggled since this coronavirus outbreak, also more so than China and Hong Kong. Hong Kong up 0.5%. Nowhere near, of course, breaking the January highs that we saw, and Shanghai actually up a massive 2.3%. Markets being heavily supported by the Chinese government is actually having an effect, and we're seeing Chinese markets just increasing all the time, so quite significant. We are building up for point and figure targets here, either to the downside or to the upside, so it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out with that big columns there. The Sensex in India was down 0.5%, and the Aussie market down 0.7%. These markets still holding their bullish trends though. The big one last week was Brent Crude. Brent Crude was up 10% last week, so we really saw that, well, nearly 10%, yeah, 10%. So we've seen that sort of move off the lows at the start of last week, and really significantly, just managing to follow a new trend up. Looks like we've put in a bottom. Of course, this will be very significant, having made 1-year lows. If we go and make new lows, that will activate big downside targets. So we have to hope that this is actually a significant bottom in crude. What we really want to see for this column to be a target is a pullback and then a move higher, and will crude have the ability to do that? And we see here we've got upside targets on the short-term chart, still around 4% higher. WTI, much the same picture. So it will be very significant to see whether we have found support here and whether we can move back to the highs that we saw. Of course, we were at $65. We saw a $15 fall this year in WTI, and we've only really retraced a little bit of that. In fact, the recovery in WTI nowhere near as strong as in Brent, and we do still have a downside target hanging over us if we make new lows. Short term, we have got some good upside targets. US NatGas also just pushing higher in the week, but the trend is still very much down on the medium and long-term charts. We do have upside targets, some 2 to 4% higher. We've got a little mini downside target here, but the trend is very clearly down for US gas prices. Gold is down about 0.2% this morning, but we are still seeing the chart is bullish on all 3 time frames for gold, so that's really significant there. And what's more important, we locked a column last week. If we make new highs, that gives us a new 17% upside target for gold, so that's going to be very significant to see that happen on the daily chart. Silver also has had the sell-off, but is actually up a third of a percent this morning and is bullish on all 3 time frames. US 10-year yields. We had seen a big fall off in 10-year yields lately, but we are just seeing them holding around this 1.6 level. That seems that the 2019 low may well be a low, and we're recovering at this stage. We are bearish on the medium and long-term charts for yields, and short-term also we're just seeing a little bit of downside potential there, so one to watch this week. That means the futures are also just looking a little bit flat this morning, but we are seeing here that German bond prices, the bond future, looking like we're going to see a little bit of a recovery there. Taking a look at the individual stocks now, this data coming from Thomson Reuters Icon. We start by looking at the Dow. Pretty strong performances on Friday. We had Visa up 1.4%. We did have IBM down 2.3%, so they were hit on Friday. So we have seen a little bit of a move to the downside there. If we look at the Nasdaq 100, we see here that the best performers on the Nasdaq were Expedia Group. They're up 11% on Friday, and Nvidia up 7%. Actually managing to get back to that 2018 high. We saw a massive performer in Nvidia, so they have had a really good, strong run from £1.50 in 6 months to $150 in 6 months to $289. On the downside, in the Dow, we saw Liberty Global down 3.95%. And in India, if we look at the downside here, the upside we had Titan Group, they're up 1.75%. That trend's still looking pretty good long term. On the downside, we did have a handful of stocks down. As you see here, ranked Yes Bank, a continual underperformer, down 4.5%. Looking to Europe now, we start by looking at the FTSE 100 in the UK. The best performing stock here is Centrica. They had out results last week. The trend is still very much down for Centrica, so there's a little bit of a relief rally this morning. Taking a look at the downside, we've got BAE Systems down 1.4%, so they've seen a sell-off there. Taking a look at to 250 now, we've got Jupiter Fund Management up 7%. They, of course, have seen quite a decline over last year or two, but starting to see some good performance there. Cas Minerals also up, having had a pretty torrid year as well. And on the downside, we've got on the downside here, we've got Penyon Group. They're down 2.7%, so that's quite significant, although the chart is looking stellar. Taking a look at Europe now, just the European majors. Volkswagen up 1.7%, Daimler, all these stocks having a relief rally, markets there, so European motors looking very strong. On the downside, we're seeing we have got BMW actually down, so they're bucking the trend. And if we look at BASF, they're down 1.4%, so they're also being hit this morning. That trend also quite clearly down. That's it for today. Until next time, happy charting. See you then.